high raised garden, higher than what we would normally do, which is a couple inches. I really got influenced probably 30 years ago when I went to the Denver Botanic Gardens. I was really amazed at what they could grow in these raised gardens that they couldn't grow flat. So this was really our first big berm. We had some smaller ones in the front, but this was created for several reasons. One, we had to level out an area for greenhouses, and we had 400 dump truck loads of dirt to get rid of. That was number one. Number two, we simply found that many plants require a slope to grow on and survive. And one of those classic plants would be agaves or century plants. If you actually go into cold areas in the wild, you will never see an agave growing on flat ground. It's fascinating. I hiked up in northern Arizona, and every agave I saw was growing on a slope, not a one flat. Because one thing they hate is moisture puddling around them. Another reason to grow berms, it gives you more space without having to buy more land. I was never really good at geometry in school, but I did remember that a squared, b squared, c squared. So you can almost, depending on your slope, almost double the land area you have simply by berming. It's amazing the number of plants you can grow, and a lot of people don't think of it that way. So everybody's berms are a little different. We've got several different ones on this garden. So let's talk about soil preparation. In here, every soil that we have on the property is compared almost identically. It's 50% compost, 50% native soil. Now, when we have things that are succulent, we will also mix in some of this material here on top. This is a popped slate material called permatil. It's a really interesting material. We actually did some of the pioneer testing on this probably 35 years ago when I was with the state. This is a residue product for making lightweight concrete blocks. It's mined up in Salisbury. It's a slate product. They take it out, they put it in a furnace, they pop it to make the concrete blocks. This is the leftover material. When we first started, they came to us, again, back in the 80s, and they said, we are paying to bury this in landfills. We got to find a use for it, and I think there's a room in landscape. And we agree, it's absolutely fantastic. It's like Chapel Hill gravel, except it's got pores inside it. So we will actually put that into the mix, usually about 1 inch, and then till that deep. Now, on the surface of our berm, we also use that as a mulch. Not necessary, but a lot of the plants growing, like the agaves and the cactus, they don't like to have dirt splashed on the leaves because that tends to rot them. So by having that, it keeps it dry even after a rain. We really like the fact that this does not wash. We've been through now Fran, Floyd, and Matthew, both of which had over a foot of rain, and we get no washing at all on the permatil. So really love that. But again, so you got two types of drainage on the berm. You got external drainage and internal drainage. Internal drainage is, does the water go down through? Both types are absolutely critical. Some people think because they got one taken care of, the other one doesn't matter. They both matter. So you got to get the surface water away, and you got to get the water that permeates to actually move on through. A lot of people will take crappy soil and they'll build up on top of it. Doesn't really work, because then your internal drainage is actually terrible. It's reduced. Now, why is that? The same reason that when you put broken pot pieces in a pot, you actually make the drainage worse. A lot of people still do it. It's the worst thing you can do, because what you have done is you have minimized the effect of gravity at pulling the water out. And the greatest experiment was a little Mr. Wizard thing. Y'all remember Mr. Wizard? Mr. Wizard took a sponge, filled it full of water, and held it up like this, and let all the water run out, and it stops. Once it stops, you turn the sponge. More water will come out. Once it stops, you turn it again, more water comes out. Well, you haven't added more water. The only difference is you now have a longer column of similar material for gravity to pull the water out. So when you have packed ground and you build on top of it, you don't have an interface layer. You're actually changing what the materials are made of. Now, the way to eliminate that is when you have your packed ground, you break that up and you put some of whatever you're getting ready to add and mix it in. And as long as you got that interface layer done correctly, problem solved. You don't have any water movement issues. It's very easy to solve. But I've seen disasters when people make berms or raised beds and don't do the interface layer fine. As long as you artificially irrigate, no problem. It was a lady in Raleigh years ago, had a whole thing of azaleas, and she had done it all artificial with this good soil on top of crappy soil and had not blended it. And it was fine until she went off to Italy for a couple months, came back after a drought, all her plants were dead because there was no interface layer. The roots could not get down. What happens to water when it goes through, it hits a different layer. It stops until it reaches what's called field capacity. At that point then, pressure actually pushes the water out. But by that time, you've got water standing. Some plants don't mind it. Other plants, it'll kill them in a heartbeat. It's a question.
How far down would you recommend for these agaves to get that, about 2 feet? Or?
Boy, you could do it with a foot. It really doesn't have to be a lot of a raised bed. We've got some beds over here that are much shorter. So it doesn't have to be huge. We did this also because we think it's a very interesting landscape element. When I'm working in a landscape, I'm trying to create rooms. I think about it just like a house, just like if I was a framer on a house. I want to build a space. I want to build a room. And I don't want rooms with little bitty walls. I mean, imagine in your house if all your walls were a foot tall. It wouldn't give you much of a sense of privacy or a sense of feeling different in that room. So I like berms to be up tall enough that I feel like I'm enclosed when I'm in there. It's a personal thing. It's with anything in gardening, there's not a right or wrong. It's what do you like? What do you feel is good? You can have a 7-foot berm, you can have a 1-foot berm. Totally personal preference. But the key is to really mix that material up together. That is essential. Yes?
When you're preparing the ground, how far down do you need to till?
Oh, if you can do 4 to 6 inches, you're fine. It's all about the interface layer. Now, if you've got a hard pan down under there, yeah, you need to break that up. But if it's just hard right on top, 4 to 6 inches is fine.
So just doing it by hand with a shovel.
Sure. Absolutely. Just blend in whatever you're putting on top. That is the key. What we do is we actually now we have a pile, big pile over there, of our native soil, and we blend it with our compost. So when we bring it in, we're putting it down here, we've already got native soil throughout. Now we make sure it's loose down here, but we don't have to do the tilling in anymore because we use native soil. But if you're buying in soil or buying in a composted mix, then you have to get that interface layer mixed together. That's absolutely huge. Questions? Now this afternoon at 2, we're going to have a demonstration right at the end down here of sort of how we do this with rocks. So this, and what we'll talk about this afternoon, one of our staff, Jeremy, who does it, will talk about how he actually makes these rock